Okay, so thank you again for agreeing to have this interview with us, Mr. Hodges. I actually wanted to talk to you since Thursday. The first moment actually the news came out about the US wanting to reduce its military presence here in Romania. And that's because the news came as a shock here in Romania, but I think also in some other Eastern European countries. So this is the first topic that I actually want to talk to you about. And my first question would be, what do you think of this US troops drawdown here in Romania? What does it mean for us, for our national security, but also for the security of the whole eastern flank of NATO?
So I think it's regrettable that the timing of this decision, that a reduction in the footprint of U.S. troops in Romania or along the Black Sea is happening while Russia is fighting a war against Ukraine on European soil, and while Russia is conducting gray zone operations against NATO countries all up and down NATO's eastern flank. So this is a bad signal to send. On the other hand, because Romania has done so well to improve its own defense, to grow its capabilities, and because the French have also set up or deployed their own troops into Romania, it probably makes sense to reduce the U.S. presence, because the U.S. cannot indefinitely do this. So I don't regret the decision. I think it's a bad time, the wrong time to do it. And of course, there should have been a very clear strategic messaging plan around it so that nobody was surprised or misunderstood what was going on.
But what do you think is the message that the US administration is sending somehow to Europe, to NATO, but also to its, let's say, enemies such as China and Iran?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I'm saying. It was the messaging is missing. There should have been a clear strategic communications plan to go along with this decision. Now, the Trump administration has been saying for a long time that at some point our allies are going to have to take on more of the responsibility, that the U.S. presence is not going to be indefinite. I personally would prefer to see it be there indefinitely, but that was never going to be the case with this administration. And so, now that they're starting to do it, it's just the messaging was poorly conceived, or there was no messaging. Actually, I think the Romanian government announced it first before the U.S. even did. So they bungled that.
We've been hearing and reading a lot of theories behind this decision and what could be the reason actually of this decision. Some say it could be the result of the summit in Alaska between President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin.
No.
You don't agree with that?
This is something that they have been planning for quite some time, I think. That, as I said, this administration has been wanting to reduce U.S. presence in Europe, going back to the last Trump administration. Fortunately, that was held off, but now it looks like they are going to finally follow through what they have been saying they wanted to do to reduce U.S. presence in Europe, because as part of the Global Force Posture Review, which we have been talking about for a while, they determined that the higher priorities are the Western Hemisphere, North America, Central America, and South America, and the Indo-Pacific region, and then Europe. And Europe, an expectation that European allies take on more of the responsibility. So what we're seeing, I don't agree with it, I don't like it, but this is the result of that analysis. And frankly, I think that this does not increase the danger for Romania. Romania has very good armed forces. It has to keep doing what it's doing, modernizing, but also society, Romanian society has to be part of the overall defense as well. So Romanian citizens understanding being able to resist or identify and resist disinformation, for example, being able to counter Russian drones. These are all things that need to be done.
We know that the US military presence in the Baltic states and in Poland will stay the same. At least this is what the officials in these countries have said. And there is something else being said these days, that the US somehow suggests that in the Baltic states and in Poland's territory could take place, so let's say possible Russia-NATO confrontation in the future. And that's why they are prioritizing those areas, those regions, and not Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Ukraine, because the US thinks that these countries could or are most likely to fall within Russia's influence in such a scenario. How do you see that?
I think you already have laid out, the reasoning according to U.S. European Command. I don't have anything else to add to it. Just keep in mind that number one, this is the result of a process that each administration goes through. I disagree with the outcome of that process, but nonetheless, this is what's happening. And the decision about where to reduce the footprint first or at all would have been done based on probably U.S. European Command, U.S. Army Europe, U.S. Air Force Europe, all of them contributing to this process. But that's not something that I would have any special insight on.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at, let's say, the security concern for Europe right now, the biggest security concern, which is the war in Ukraine, of course. We saw this year that President Donald Trump had a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska. We also know that there were some phone conversations, and there should be, or they planned to have actually another summit in Budapest, in Hungary, but they canceled it. How do you see this approach of the US administration right now towards the war in Ukraine and also towards the Kremlin?
Well, I think that it's good that these meetings, this meeting in Budapest was canceled, because nothing good was going to come out of that. I have always hoped that President Trump would finally get angry about what Putin and Lavrov were doing and saying, that they clearly had no respect for the Trump administration's approach. And that showed over the last several months. So finally, the president appears to have become angry about this and recognizes that they have not respected him. And so perhaps that means we will see finally severe sanctions enforced, the delivery of capabilities to Ukraine, some teeth, something significant, instead of what the Trump administration has been doing, which is to back away every time there's a phone call or something, and Putin is able to delay what President Trump had said he was going to do. So hopefully this represents a real change in policy. But I think the Trump administration's approach to this war has been doomed from the very beginning, because they never cared or understood the origin of the war, the history, the geography, why this mattered, why Ukrainians were fighting so hard, and why it's important for America's strategic interest, as well as the strategic interests of European countries like Romania. So the Russians could see that, and that's why they played along, and looks like the president finally got angry about this. But I would also say that European countries have been way too slow, including Romania, to take all the steps necessary to stop Russia from its gray zone operations. I'm talking about in the Black Sea, drones flying through Romanian airspace, and why are Romanians not shooting them down? I mean, why are they allowed to fly through Romania and go to Ukraine? I think these are things that Romanians can also be doing better, along with other European countries.
So do you think Romania should actually take down all these drones, Russian drones that are entering
Yes,
our airspace? Mm-hmm.
absolutely. I mean, these are violations of Romanian airspace. It's illegal. They're very dangerous because you don't know when one of these things could hit a civilian aircraft, for example, or could land on somebody's house. It's but the Russians will keep doing this until there are some consequences. And I think now is the time. It's past the time for Romania as well as Poland and other countries to develop the capabilities and to practice. Imagine 300 drones in one night going into Constanta and Sibiu and Bucharest. I mean, that's what happens in Ukraine every night. Is Romania prepared for that? I don't think so.
There is actually something else that I also read this morning about also Poland, because people say and analysts say that Poland is the country that is best prepared for war because it has invested a lot in its defense capabilities. It allocates a lot from its GDP to defense. But other people say that it's actually preparing for a war of the past, not necessarily for a modern fight. And just as you said, Romania might not be prepared for such drones, like swarm drones. Let's say, what do you think all these countries should do? Because there are some initiatives at the European level. How could they best improve our defense?
Well, first of all, I would not say that Poland is preparing for the wrong war or for the last war. It's not either or. It's not drones or tanks. It's the Russians are using all of that. The Russians are not using just drones. The Ukrainians are not using just drones. So I think what Poland is doing is smart in terms of having real capability. It's growing the size of its military, land, air, and sea, to be not only defend Poland, but also to be a contributing member of NATO, to be prepared to fight other places as well. And so I think that the first two or three priorities for any defense minister and any prime minister are to explain to the population what's at stake, what's at risk here, why is this important, why do we have to do that, what is the threat, and to be very clear and to speak to people as if they are adults. That's number one. And when you do that, then you can get the population understanding why they have to pay taxes to have enough defense, and also that talented young women and men want to join the military to serve, to do their part. So to me, that's the first thing. The second thing is you have to practice, you have to train, you have to do exercises. So it's not only new equipment, you have to train on how to use, how to employ it. And so in terms of air defense, the fact that Poland, and I think it was also the Dutch, shot down a few of those drones a few weeks ago when there were 21 drones launched into Poland, they identified them right away. But the response was to send up, an F-35 and F-16. They shot down, I think, 3 or 4 of these things out of 21. Now, the Ukrainians were shaking their head like, why would you use an F-35 to shoot down a drone? So Poland had the right rules of engagement. I don't know that Romania has done that yet, that you can shoot down drones right away. But there are other systems that should be used to shoot these things down. Now, of course, you have to be conscious. If you do shoot one down, where does it land? I mean, does it land on top of a village or something like that? So, that's why you have to exercise. You have to practice doing these things and get the systems right. So that to me is the number 2 priority. Get ready. And then, number 3 is getting the new equipment that you need, or repairing what you have, the modernization part. But exercise, real exercises, real demanding, against an enemy threat that looks like what hits Ukraine every night.
You were mentioning right now the soldiers part, the number of soldiers within an armed forces, of course, of a country. And we've been seeing some changes in Europe as well lately. We know that, for example, Croatia has restarted the mandatory military service. Do you think right now Europe as a whole, or NATO maybe, has enough soldiers to fight a war like the one that we are seeing now in Ukraine? Because there are all these theories about Russia wanting to start a war with NATO within the following 3, 5, or 7 years.
Well, first of all, if you want to prevent a war with Russia, help Ukraine defeat Russia. That's the best way to guarantee that Russia will never invade Romania, is for Ukraine to defeat Russia. So Romania, as well as all the other countries of Europe, should be pouring into Ukraine all the ammunition, the weapons, things that they can possibly spare, so that Ukraine is able to do that. That's number one. As to the number of troops, of course, there's not enough. I mean, Germany has publicly said they still need about another 80,000 soldiers for the Bundeswehr, and they're already one of the largest in Europe. But they think that they are still short about 80,000 troops. So that tells you right there that there's not enough. Now, whether or not a nation goes to the draft or conscription or sticks with the all-volunteer force, that's a decision that's unique to each nation. What's best for their culture, what they need, how do they do that? So I would not be one to recommend a country should or should not use mandatory service, but I think that having the ministries know what they need. The chief of defense knows what he needs, and that's what you should have.
So helping Ukraine to win this war is the best way to prevent the war, actually, in Europe, you just said. And there are now talks about these long-range missiles, the Tomahawk missiles, that the US should or should not give to Ukraine. And we know that the Pentagon says it has enough in its stockpile, so it can give Ukraine such missiles. But President Donald Trump said the other day that it's not the right moment to do that. What do you think of that? And how could Europe actually replace this need from the US with its own missiles?
Well, I disagree with the president on this, of course. The theory of victory for Ukraine is to destroy, I think, is to destroy Russia's oil and gas export capability, to do what they're doing now, to hammer away at the oil and gas infrastructure that enables Russia to produce and export oil to China and India and some other customers. That's what pays for their war. So if Ukraine is successful at destroying that oil and gas infrastructure, then it becomes very difficult for Russia to continue paying for this war. And even better, if nations on the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea can disrupt the flow of oil in these illegal shadow fleet vessels. And this is where I think, Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania could do much more to stop these vessels. Same thing for all the countries in the Baltic Sea. They should be stopping. There's like 3 per day go out through the Danish Straits. Stop them. They're illegal. They're environmentally disasters waiting to happen. Not properly insured, not properly registered. So there's a lot of reasons that this could be done. So anyway, you've got kinetic strikes against the infrastructure and stopping the shadow fleet vessels. Now, Tomahawk, of course, would be a significant addition to what Ukraine already has. And I think this is a bad policy decision by the U.S. The Pentagon has already made it clear that, of course, they have something that they could spare, and we could make more. But this is the result of the administration, and the Biden administration did the same mistake, made the same mistake. They haven't declared the end state. What's the objective? What are we trying to do? And if you don't clearly define the objective, which should be help Ukraine defeat Russia, if you don't do that, then you're not likely to have to come up with the right policies. Same is true of European countries that have not said we want Ukraine to win. If they did, then they would do everything necessary to help Ukraine. So Germany with Taurus is an example.
We know that right now in Ukraine, let's say the hottest area is in Pokrovsk, in the Pokrovsk region. There are huge battles right now between the Russian armed forces and the Ukrainian armed forces. Some people say that the Russian armed forces have massed a lot of troops, around 170,000 troops, and that the Ukrainian soldiers are barely holding on their positions. What do you think the outcome of these battles would be? Do you think the Ukrainian armed forces will withdraw? What will happen if Ukraine will lose this strategic region?
Well, there were people last year, July 2024, that were predicting that Pokrovsk was going to fall then. And so here we are now in November of 2025. At some point, the Ukrainians may decide that they have bought enough time, for example, or they're prepared new defenses further back that are better defendable, more defendable. But I think, right now, Pokrovsk is a destroyed city. I would not call it strategic. I would trust the Ukrainian General Staff to know when the right time is. Of course, it's terrible fighting there. But as I've thought about this battle, this part of the war, two or three things really stick in my mind. Number one, you cannot defend terrain only with drones. I mean, the Ukrainians have millions of drones, but you can't use drones alone to stop the way the Russians have kept pressing the defenders. So having enough artillery, enough rockets, and other systems that can help is part of it. So I think we should be careful. And this would be true in Romania, Poland, and other countries. Don't learn the wrong lessons from this war about all you need is drones. That's not true. If I think that you can see the manpower requirements. Your question earlier was a good one. Do you have enough people? Do you have enough troops? And you always need more than you think you did. We had to grow the size of the U.S. Army while we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, significantly increased the number of troops that we had, because it just, not because people were getting killed or wounded, but because there's so many requirements to do things. And I would imagine that the strategic planners of Romanian General Staff are aware of that, are thinking of that. And then the third thing that I would that really sticks in my mind about this fighting in Pokrovsk, the Russians have failed in over 11 years with over 1 million casualties, despite having every advantage. I mean, Pokrovsk is in the far eastern part of Ukraine, and the Russians are still not there. So anybody that thinks that Russian victory is inevitable has no idea what they're talking about. They don't understand how hard and how well the Ukrainians are defending. And I think we're going to see that the Russians don't have the ability to exploit, even if they finally do take Pokrovsk and the Ukrainians pull back to the next defense line, then what? Then what? What are the Russians going to do after that? I don't think they have the ability to exploit and make more of it.
President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine can still fight for 2 to 3 years. This is also something said based on the promises that Europe also made regarding military equipment and the support they will give to Ukraine in the future. But as you said, it's not necessarily enough to have just military equipment because you also need manpower. Do you think that Ukraine can actually still hold back the Russian invasion for 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, it's much more effective if they have help from the West with ammunition, weapons, capabilities, intelligence, investment in Ukraine's own defense industry. I mean, they make about 40% of what they use already. So investment in their defense industry would also be a way to help. Use of these frozen Russian assets, that's 200 billion euro. That would help. So there's a lot of things that Europe can do, but Europe needs to get off their ass. Excuse me. If Ukraine fails, it will be because we failed. And then you're going to have not only millions more Ukrainian refugees pouring into Romania, Poland, and Germany and other countries. You're going to see the Russian army forcing thousands of Ukrainian soldiers into the Red Army. And then they're going to feel emboldened. And Moldova is probably number one on their list. So this is where Europe needs to take the threat very seriously and do something while you have a chance.
As you said, Romania could be one of the countries that could get more affected about the outcome of this war. How do you think Bucharest could, let's say, take advantage of the opportunities that might come after this war ends? Let's hope it will end soon. How could it improve its position, its strategic position here on the eastern flank of NATO in such a case?
Well, I would say improving the air and missile defense and also anti-ship capabilities, being able to defeat in case Russia ever did try some sort of amphibious operation, down through Ukraine, Moldova, or across from the Black Sea. That would be part of it. But also, having a very strong relationship with Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine is probably the best army in Europe right now. And that's a good partner for Romania to have on your flank. Between you and Russia are your Ukrainian friends. So I would see it in Romania's interest to do everything possible to strengthen that relationship in economic terms, military terms, diplomatic terms, to work together on enforcing freedom of navigation on the Black Sea. I mean, these are the kind of areas where I think Romania should prioritize. And then, of course, you've got good quality equipment, continue modernizing, continue training. And Romania provides a good base already there at MK for the NATO Black Sea Air Policing Mission, as well as, for now, U.S. There's still going to be U.S. there, by the way. So those are the kind of things I think. And then, I would say you've got to make the Danube River. It should be the most significant economic artery in Europe. I mean, it touches 7 or 8 different countries, but nations are not investing enough into the infrastructure along the river to make it where it can handle huge volume of cargo traffic. I live here in Frankfurt, and on the Main River and the Rhine River, there are big cargo barges going up and down all day long, and I don't see that on the Danube. So I think investing in the Danube as a economic artery would also be important.
Now, another and the last topic that I want to discuss with you is related to the debate that we are seeing these days about this nuclear weapons testing, because we know Russia said last week that it has tested a new nuclear-powered missile. Now the US president says that the US will also start testing nuclear weapons. First of all, is it okay to say that we are testing nuclear weapons? Because we know that these weapons are not detonated. First of all, and second of all, where all these narratives are leading us.
Yeah, I think most of the President Trump's administration was caught by surprise when he said that. I mean, I think I can't explain why he said that. I mean, I've heard people speculate it was in reaction to the Russian test and so on, but actually, the things he said are just not correct, factually correct. You know, North Korea is the last one that actually tested a nuclear weapon, and that was maybe 2 decades ago or more. So, and then of course, now what you're seeing is people are starting to try and correct, well, we're not going to actually, do explosions or things like that. And of course, it costs very expensive and it would take some time to get ready for all this. Of course, if you have nuclear weapons, the enemy needs to believe that they're capable, that they'll work for your deterrent to be credible. So I'm not against that. But I think it would be unfortunate if then China said, well, we better start testing again, and then others start. So this is where um, uh, probably was not helpful to say that, in my view.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Hodges, for all these answers. I will.
Well,